Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thanks for those of you who came back. Tonight, we're going to go over a presentation about what we heard this week during our discovery visit. And we're going to describe what we're doing next time during our design visit. But we're going to reflect what we heard, and then we're going to give you an opportunity to comment, give new input, share your values, share some of your ideas, and we'll incorporate them into our process. So I'm Ian Lockwood, I'm with Toole Design Group, and we have a design team here, which I'll introduce in a moment. And we will be recording what you suggest. And so with that, I'd like to start the presentation. So this is us, Toole Design Group. We're planners, engineers, and landscape architects. We also write books on standards on how to design streets and bicycle facilities and that kind of thing. These are just some of our projects. We do a variety of projects, retrofitting streets, building streets all the way through construction drawings, complete streets where you can walk comfortably, ride your bike comfortably, take transit or drive. These are just a sample of some of our books and plans. I'm very proud of our work in Chicago, at the city of Chicago, and also around the university, planning their streets and their bike facilities and writing their winter maintenance manual so that they can now ride all year long, which is really cool, especially for the students who use bicycles a lot. We write a lot of these guides, and we share them with provinces, states, cities, and our competitors, actually, to help them design really cool streets. This is the team that's here tonight. I'm Ian. Tyler's in charge of the project. He's a project manager and an engineer. Ryan, a lot of the drawings you'll see Ryan did. And Shanna is our landscape architect, helping make the place softer and more inclusive. So these are the folks that were working on the things that you'll see tonight and listening to all of the input. So this is what we did this week. We have 4 opportunities for public participation. We had 2 open studios where people came down, looked at plans, gave suggestions, looked over our shoulders, asked all sorts of things, had suggestions. And we had a public meeting on Tuesday evening, and then we have this public meeting. So what we'll do tonight is we'll go through more or less what we've heard and what we did, and then we'll ask you for your input, since you haven't had a chance yet, so you can share with us. So this was what we call Discovery Week, where we're learning about the values, the history, the desires of the community. We tour Commercial Street, which is our study area, to learn about that. We walked with people who are knowledgeable about the area, explaining what some of the issues and opportunities are. And these are some of the cool attributes, just a small set, there's lots of them. The beautiful historic buildings, the main street. Commercial is only about half a kilometer long, so it's nice and compact, so you can get some energy going on it. The parkway is good because it takes the traffic pressure off. This used to be a through route long time ago. And then with Terminal Avenue, and then with the Parkway, that takes the traffic functions off of Commercial Street and allows it to be more of a main street, about a cool place for social and economic exchange. There's some cool bends and views. It's a very interesting street. There's already investment and restoration interest in the area with new development coming in on empty sites and redeveloped sites. You've got a nice network. So we're trying to work nicely with your radial pattern that comes in from the neighborhoods into the downtown. And you've got a very engaged population with the business community and folks coming in the meetings. And you've got nice proximity to the waterfront, which if we can make better connections, could add a lot of value to Commercial Street. Some of the challenges that we heard were, it's not a speeding problem, it's not breaking the law problem, but some of the speeds on Terminal, particularly towards, on Commercial, are too fast. When people get off Terminal Avenue, they go too quickly up the street. Crossing Terminal Avenue from one side to the other is difficult and intimidating for a lot of people. The sidewalks, we heard, are very narrow. Businesses would like to display some of their things in the sidewalk. People would like to have seating outside for meals, but the sidewalks are pretty small. You can see some of the reaction to that, some of those platforms that have been built in the parking row to create seating. Legibility is a concern for folks. People want the downtown to be intuitively navigable, so that when you come downtown, you know where you are, you know how to get places, you can find the street. One of the folks that was here yesterday has lived in Nanaimo for a while and didn't know Commercial Street was here until he came to our workshop. So it's kind of hidden. We'd like to make it unhidden. Turn lanes and signals, these sorts of things. Your main street wants to be about a place, an exchange, go to socialize and eat and enjoy. And it's not really about throughput and levels of service for motorists. So we don't think we need a lot of turn lanes and that kind of thing on the street. There's some plazas. There's Dallas Square at the end of Church Street where the Cenotaph is. And there's Diane Crawl Plaza right near here. And both of these gathering spaces can have a lot of potential and can be really wonderful spaces. They're okay now. The Cenotaph's okay. Diane Crawl Plaza is a little bit hot and barren and unused. So we'd like to think about how to change that to make them more contributing spaces. And there's a strange large intersection at Wallace and Victoria. Long distances to cross. Probably historic reasons why it's like that, but we'd like to revisit the design of that and make it friendlier for everybody. So these are some of the attributes that create wonderful main streets. Being connected, having things convenient, all the sorts of things you'd want on a daily and weekly basis nearby. Comfortable, and I'm going to go through all of these things in more detail. But engaging, accessible, legible, like I mentioned. We want it to be safe as well, so best practices to reduce the probability of crashes or things like that. And equitable, so that everybody from Nanaimo feels comfortable coming downtown. So these are some thoughts that we have about connected. You've got this wonderful radial pattern of streets coming into downtown. You've got a network of streets that evolved as the water got filled in and the downtown was created. It wasn't all there before. There was water channels coming in, and it was filled. And part of that history has created the network that you've got today. But it's fairly well connected. Some of the challenges have to do with topography and the original geography of that space. So you got the big idea of connected in terms of the street network, and then you got little parts of connectivity through these little alleys and things that you have downtown, and a whole range of things in between. You've got different land uses coming downtown, a lot more housing, which will help. You got some institutions like the library, you got the convention center, restaurants. So the more types of mix of uses you have, the more synergies you'll get, and the more activity and the more vibrancy. So we want to keep that trend going. Comfort is really important. Being at ease with your environment from your own physical safety. We heard a lot about that over the course of the week. And also comfort from the elements. And people mentioned awnings, seating, these sorts of things was important. To be able to cross the street, having the buildings with windows to provide natural surveillance so you feel at ease when you're walking down the street, that kind of thing. So this is about the awnings. So these awnings, you can see the drip line is about here. This is dry and this is wet. It was raining the other day when we took these pictures. So these are actually effective awnings. These awnings, on the other hand, only go out a little bit and almost ensure you get wet when you're walking down that part of the street. So we'd like to suggest some awning guidelines so that there's increased comfort in inclement weather or even in hot weather. You've got some wonderful buildings, great heritage buildings with very engaging ground floors. So this is a terrific resource. And this gives you an edge over the suburbs. This provides the character and the scale which can make your downtown very successful. So we heard a range of things about these buildings. Some people said tear them down and build modern buildings with retail on the ground floor and more density. Other people said, for goodness sake, save them. You'll regret it if you take them down. And we kind of leaned more towards the latter, that this is very important culturally and historically to your city and gives your downtown an edge that can never be replicated elsewhere and can't be replaced if you lose it. And these are great displays. Some folks have put a lot of effort into their window displays, which makes an engaging environment. It keeps people's interest as they're walking down the street. And the more engaging your environment is, the further people will be willing to walk. And what we'd like to see is more of this. These merchants have put some stuff out on the sidewalk despite its narrow width. But if we could make the sidewalks bigger, you could have more of that and have a more interesting walk as you're walking around your downtown. And then there's some other facades that don't do that. They're blank walls. And this kind of kills the energy of the space. And actually some people can go, and if they sense that there's no energy further up, they'll just turn around and go back. So we want to really keep that engaging environment, not just on Commercial Street itself, but then down to the waterfront to draw people in from the waterfront into the downtown. Here's a couple of examples of not very engaging facades. These folks could have an engaging facade, but they've kept the blinds down, which makes it a dull experience. This is an art gallery, but there's no art to look at, and so I'm sure there's something in the building that they could make the walk interesting as you go by, and perhaps they could make the facade a little bit more interesting, because this is one of the great views. It's one of those bends. You can see that building from up the street, and so there's a really wonderful opportunity to do something significant on that facade and in those windows to make that more engaging. And then from an access perspective, we want it to be friendlier for people with disabilities. We want the sidewalks wide enough so that maybe two couples could pass, that kind of thing, that you can have your displays so you can get your loading done. Parking is important to a lot of people to access the downtown. Parking for cars and for bicycles. Keeping the street network intact so you can access the neighborhood from various locations. And then removing obstacles. There's some trees that are in the path. There's sandwich boards that take up a lot of the sidewalk width. There's a bunch of obstacles, and if we could get the sidewalk widths wider, we can have room for those things and people to walk more comfortably. Legibility is really important. So when you're on the waterfront, do you know that there's a downtown up there that you could go to? You've got some really great landmarks like the Bastion, and when you look the other way up Bastion Street, as you kind of go up the hill a little bit, there's a great view of the church. And so these are landmarks, and they can help people navigate. Excuse me. There's some places that aren't legible, like that intersection we were talking about earlier. So we'd like to correct that, just so that everybody can intuitively find their way around the downtown, whether you're on foot, bike, car, what have you. We also want to make things safe, and there's already been a lot of work done on Front Street to try and make the street safer and more comfortable for cyclists and easier to cross through that project. But in towards Commercial, there are places that we would like to use best practices to reduce the probability of any collisions, injuries, or that kind of thing. Like when we were at this intersection, there was plenty of honking and discomfort up there. This is the high-speed turn channel at the end of Church, which the city has rightly blocked off because folks would come off too quickly up into the downtown. And then equitable. We really want the downtown environment to be accessible for everyone who lives in Nanaimo or visits Nanaimo, whether you're using a wheelchair or if you have a visual impairment or if you're elderly or young, to make it accessible for everybody. My parents retired to Nanaimo, and my father used a wheelchair, and so when I came here to visit him, he didn't have the best time getting around because a lot of the areas weren't really designed to accommodate him adequately. So I'd like to make it accommodate people with physical disabilities more so than it is today. We also want to support the businesses and the events. We really need to maximize the social and economic exchange. We need to design the street to help support the businesses. We want this street to attract more businesses to the downtown and more people downtown. And we also want to integrate the public spaces with the street. And you've got a couple of public spaces with tremendous potential. Dan Crawl Plaza. You've got the Dallas Plaza down at the end of Church Street with the cenotaph in it. You've got little public spaces like the Cole Monument just down by Church Street as well. But they're kind of alone, like you have the street and then you have these spaces. And what would help you when you're doing your events is to better integrate the designs of the street in your public spaces so that when you close your street, you have a nicer venue for your events. So we'll be looking at that when we come back during our design week. And some of the students that visited us this week actually came up with some starter ideas, which will be shown in a few minutes. A lot of cities develop what they call a vision, and a vision is a consensus of what the place ought to be like, not necessarily what it is, but what it ought to be like. So that's what we were talking about this week. What are our values? What should Commercial Street be like in the future? There is no vision statement for it at the moment, but there's been a lot of work done through this Reimagined Nanaimo initiative. And there's all of these goals that have been created. And if you apply those goals to Commercial Street, a vision would be something like this: a green, connected, and equitable place that reflects the history of Nanaimo while attracting people, investment, and vitality. So that kind of reflects the goals. Now that vision statement's probably got some problems with it or errors, but it's close, and what we need to do is just work on it a little bit. And that becomes the compass which will help guide the design and then future changes to the street. There's some fundamentals, and this is important not just for Commercial Street, but for the whole downtown. When cities were invented about 6,500 years ago, they were invented to bring people together for social and economic exchange. The transportation purpose of cities was actually to reduce travel. So everyone's together and they can do their thing in the city, whether they're exchanging labor or entertainment or education or what have you. It's convenient, effective, and efficient. Now my profession, transportation engineering, got very good at speeding up motorists, and that tended to spread downtowns and cities out, reducing exchange, reducing proximity. And where the cities did that the most, it tended to do a lot of harm. And so I think we've learned from that, and that our goal is no longer just to speed up motorists, it's actually to create a great place. And a lot of cities are slowing down the motorists and trying to create environments where you can have good outcomes for the businesses, for the pedestrians, for the views, for the history. So the land use purpose of cities is to bring the components of civic life together, and that was one of the city's goals, to increase the mix and density of the downtown, so you get more of that exchange. So we want to get the fundamentals right. So when Nanaimo began, this was its street network. Fantastic radial pattern, all leading to what looks like a hub, right? And so this is the downtown. It was a harbor town. The water came deep into the downtown. This is Commercial Street right here, and it goes into Church. So that's been there since the beginning, and that's why it has such a great history. And then over time, these areas were filled in, and the the downtown expanded. These are some of the key routes through the downtown: Wallace, Terminal, and Front. And these created barriers, and there's some geographical barriers as well to access the downtown. And so what we'd like to do is ameliorate some of those barriers to allow more exchange, more value coming to the downtown, from the community, make it easier to access the downtown. And so that's what it looks like over the old historic map. And you can see where there was water now. There's Terminal, there's Front Street where there used to be water, but good old Commercial Street still right there. And this is what it looked like back in the day. And that view looks a little bit different today. This building has been replaced with that building. But the interesting thing, when you look back at the history of Nanaimo, for most of the history, there were no crosswalks, there were no traffic signals. These were all shared spaces where you could walk, travel, shop. They were truly public spaces. And that's kind of the sentiment we'd like to bring back, is to make it a really public space. You can still drive on it, you can still walk on it, ride your bike, shop, socialize, but get back to the intent, the original historic intent, instead of some of the streets which are much more sort of car-oriented for throughput. And this is what it looks like today. And you can kind of see the impact that the motorists have had on the place, where, this is where you drive, except only this direction. So it's changed the tenor of the downtown, and we'd like to get back some of that historic, cool vibe that was there. I just want to go over the West Palm story. We've heard a lot about people are experiencing homelessness, people who are have addiction issues and other sorts of things, social issues going on. And a lot of places have challenges like that. And I'd like to just share the West Palm story with you, because that place had pretty serious issues like that as well. So this is West Palm Beach. I was the head of transportation for West Palm Beach in the 1990s. And when I grew up and worked in the Ottawa area and consulted over there in Ontario for about 10 years, and then was asked if I would head up the transportation group in this city. And I thought that would be really cool, because the mayor said that she would allow me to experiment on the streets down there, which appealed to me. But the place wasn't very nice. When I got down there, the city had $7,000 in reserves. It was broke. 80% of our main shopping street was vacant. Anybody who had any choice had left the city, leaving behind people with no choice. We had a really bad drug problem in the city, gang problem, and prostitution problem. 90% of our prostitutes were HIV positive. When HBO needed a location to film a documentary about drug abuse in the United States, they came to West Palm Beach, and they found everything they needed in our downtown. And so it was nominated for an Academy Award in 1989, and that's how everybody knew about our city. And so we had really serious problems. Half our buildings had been torn down for code violations, or they fell down, and they became surface parking lots where people drove back in for jobs. And so this is what we were left with, this sort of vacant city that was boarded up and derelict and quite unattractive. This place used to have houses on it. They were all torn down. And the mayor, Nancy Graham, decided to do something about it. She was newly elected, and she had a charrette, something like this, but involving a lot of people across the whole city. They came up with a vision, and they actually drew it. They drew this fantastic land use vision of this mixed-use development with housing and shops and grocery stores and all the sorts of things you'd want in your downtown. And but they didn't draw the streets. And so that was my job. I was to make the streets support that wonderful vision that they had for the downtown. And My predecessors had sped up the streets for levels of service for motorists. They made them one way, which actually exported value out to the suburbs and created barriers in our city. And this is Dixie Highway. It went from Key West all the way up to Maine, and people just roared through here. Just to give you an idea how empty this place was, the windows broke on this building years ago, and enough flies and things had died, so enough soil built up on the floor in there to support small trees which grew out of the windows. And so I'd just been hired, and this is a picture I took on a Sunday, standing out in the street, and I'm wondering, what am I going to do to change this? And keep in mind, this is the 1990s. Road diet had not been coined yet. Complete streets, that word didn't mean anything. It wasn't invented yet. Smart growth, vision zero, context-sensitive design, all these ideas that we take for granted today, they weren't even coined yet. And so I had to go to the state, which is like going to the ministry here at the province, and say, look, I'd like to change something here. I think we've dedicated too much space to motorists, and I'd like to remove one of those lanes, widen the sidewalks, plant some trees, that kind of thing, to make it a place that people would want to come to. This sidewalk, you can see how they cantilevered over, but elsewhere, the sidewalk was so narrow that you had to walk single file. They'd used all the space for the motorists. And the DOT people looked at me and said, well, no, that's not what we do. We widen roads, we don't narrow roads. And anyway, it took a lot of convincing, but we eventually got to a level where the decision makers had the authority to change the streets in accordance with our vision. And so it took a while, but we got to the point where we could reconstruct the street and add sidewalks and trees. We raised the intersections to make it more friendly. And lo and behold, people started coming back to the downtown. Pedestrians started walking again. Businesses started occupying buildings again. Notice the windows got fixed. Something moved in. In fact, we started doing this on lots of streets, and more investment and people came to our city. Now, we were a city of about 80,000 people at the time, and $3 billion worth of private investment came to our downtown over about a 5-year period, because we made it a great public realm with the streets, and we had a vision with those land uses. So you can change decades of disinvestments and abuse, drug abuse and so forth in a city with the right plan and the right vision and the right leadership. This is another one of the big state roads. This is Olive Avenue, and it cut this neighborhood in half. This is where the term road diet was coined on this project. It's one of the very first on the continent. And so it went from 5 lanes to 2 lanes, and the community was sewn back together. There's 2 elementary schools on this street. The kids started to walk to school again. Neighbors started to know their neighbors. They wouldn't go out before because it was just so noisy and hostile. So it really had a big effect on the community. This was our main street. It was a one-way car conduit, 80% vacancies on the sides. So we 2-wayed it, we beautified it, and lo and behold, it got fully occupied with stores, which could then compete with the suburban malls and so on, because we had history and we had place, which they didn't. So people wanted to come down and enjoy that kind of character and ambiance. This is where Crack America was filmed, and I was told when I got there, because I was some Canadian who didn't understand the culture according to a lot of the staff there, and they told me, if you go there in your car, go there with someone else, do not get out of your car. If somebody tries to stop you, don't stop because it's an ambush. Go, drive away, and make sure you have a cell phone. And I'm thinking, how bad can it be? So, of course, I went alone by myself out of the car with my camera and got. I met a drug dealer, I have to admit, and he thought I was a cop because I had a camera, and he wanted to beat me up. And so I said, actually, you don't want to beat me up because I want to change this street. I want to traffic calm this street, make it beautiful, and attract businesses and people back to here. And he wasn't really having it. Anyway, so I kept talking about it. And we had just traffic calmed a street in one of the neighborhoods called Sapodilla. I said, you know, I'd like to comment like what we did on Sapodilla. And he steps back. He was huge, by the way. Like I didn't have a chance. And he says, Sapodilla? I go, yeah, Sapodilla. And he goes, my mother lives on Sapodilla. And I go, really? How does she like the street? And he goes, she loves it. She sits on her front yard and she meets her friends. She says, so that's what you want to do through here? And I go, yeah, something like that. And so the drug dealer said, well, you shouldn't be here, but I'm going to stay with you so you don't get hurt. And so me and the drug dealer walked around here, and he pointed out all the problems. He introduced me to people. I got a lot of good public input, and we redesigned the area accordingly. And so that view, you look at this nice view down to this old school, turned into this view. So we went from that crack America to that, where we have restaurants, housing, department store, theater, nice streets. And so with the right plan and the right public realm, you can take one of the worst places on the continent and turn it into a really cool place. Now, you're not one of the worst places on the continent by far, but with the right design and the right vision, you can achieve your goals and objectives of attracting more people and investment into your downtown. This was an old church. We wanted to preserve our heritage down in West Palm Beach as well. Someone had added this annex, which we didn't really like, but we wanted to create a public space. Now, when I was taking this picture, I had to watch out for rusty syringes and all the sorts of paraphernalia that go with what was going on in that area. And so that picture became that picture. And now it's highly successful. People come from all over to enjoy this space. So that's just a primer to let you know that you can actually make a difference in all the sort of social issues that you might have through changes to your city, and also through parallel programs of from your health departments and so on. So we heard a lot this week. We can't share everything, but because there's so much of it, but we'll share the highlights. We had a couple maps around, and people put Post-it notes on with add trees, all kinds of things that they liked, what they didn't like, what was missing. So that's all been photographed and recorded. And we went on walks and saw the area, learned about the physical layout of the place. People came in, and we had pinups. We had a little public meeting. Got input then. And here's some folks talking about some ideas for the corridor. These are the students drawing some ideas for a couple of the plazas. There's one of the groups. So this is what they came up with. Some really terrific ideas about how to expand Diane Crowell Plaza and include the street, so it doesn't feel like such a separated place. Adding other musical elements into the music theme. Cool wayfinding idea of having salmons, artistic salmons starting down by the water, coming up the street and into Diane Crowell Plaza, like a wayfinding thing. It would be really interesting. And then we looked at the Dallas Plaza, where the cenotaph is, and found ways to make it more interesting and more active, so it can still do its ceremonial roles, but can have other uses for the rest of the year as well. So it's just not a November 11th thing. One of the ideas, which is pretty neat, was to spread some of the plaza ideas across Front Street, so that when you're going through there, you know that this is an entryway up to some place that could be really interesting, to sort of advertise the fact that you've got this really cool street up there. And then we had our intern put it all together for us right at that table right there. So we had some kids come in. So these are the questions we did ask. What were people's values that should shape the place? What people like that want to preserve? What they don't like, they like to change, what's missing? And those are the same questions we'll ask you tonight, and we'll record anything you have to share. This is a summary of what we heard. And so the idea is to come up with a great design, and we broke it up into those ideas we were talking about: safe, equitable, connected. And then all of the input we summarized depending what category it kind of fell in. So in terms of accessible, there's a lot of interest in making it more pedestrian friendly, making spaces more flexible, especially for events. Ensure loading zones. Not everybody has an alley where they could load. Some people have to load off of the street. Accessible parking. The sidewalks was important for a lot of people to make them wider. Uneven surfaces. So these are the sorts of things that people were interested in. That folks wanted some wayfinding, get rid of the confusion at some of the intersections, safer crossings, reduce the high speeds. Somebody suggested a roundabout up at that strange intersection. From an equity perspective, public restrooms, places to sit, curbless street. And this is important because if you have events, the curbs act like these barriers. It may not be a barrier to if you're able-bodied, but if you're in a wheelchair, like my father was when they retired here, it may as well be a wall. He can't get up or down that 6-inch curb, so he'd have to get to the end of the block to get up the curb. So if you do a flush street, then folks with physical challenges can get around just like everybody else. Connected, reduce the barrier effects of some of the streets, accommodate active transportation, walking and cycling, make things convenient, places to eat, parking convenient. People suggested farmers markets, that kind of thing. Make it comfortable. The awnings we've covered, but planting and trees. A lot of people like the idea of enclosure that street trees would provide. Noise, especially from Terminal Avenue, is disruptive. Engaging, more things for kids. Maybe up at Diana Krall Plaza, there could be instruments that they could play, places where they could gather and play. Public art, areas that are more conducive to events and more events. Celebrate the views. You've got some great views. Let's celebrate those. An elevated view, can we do places where you could go up higher and have rooftop patios or something, and you can see across the vistas? Do something about the blank wall. So these are the sorts of things that we heard frequently, and that's why they're on this on the slide. So all of this input, the design team has heard. We've recorded it. People have drawn circles around places on maps that these are the worst things. And when we come back in February, we'll take all of that input and start translating it into designs where everybody can come back and look at those and help design the place so that at the end of the week, we'll have what we call an informed consensus of the direction for Commercial Street. There's a lot of ideas we heard about the awnings, the accessibility, the trees that are in the way and some of the sidewalks, the different facades, what people didn't like and what they did like, all the different paving materials and the benefits and disbenefits of those. Some people said that the pavers in the sidewalk caused them issues when they walked, tripping. There's some elderly people who had tripped on those, and that they would probably prefer like a brushed concrete sidewalk. And we kind of like the texture in the street because it calms the traffic. So we heard a lot of things about those sorts of design things. From a comfort perspective, the alcoves, some people felt they were kind of creepy and they didn't know if there was somebody in there. Loading came up a number of times, that we need to really manage the curb well so that it can serve all the different needs of the street. The whole idea of greening the street and making it softer and with trees came up a number of times. Maybe do something to help reduce the stormwater runoff. The patios ideas. People really like the patios because they can have outdoor experience in good weather. And today, because of the curbs and so forth, you have to build those platforms. So that curbless street would provide a lot more flexibility. So during the right times of the year, you can have far more seating out in the street. And then the connections. The street doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's connected to places, and some of the connections are stronger than others. So where there's a solid line, like So I guess which way's north? That way's north? So here at Diane Carl Plaza, when you look across the street, there's that little one-way street, and when you look up, there's a really handsome building. I can't remember what it's called. Something station? What's it called? Plaza Hotel. Beautiful building. But then when you go around the corner, it kind of is not so great anymore. When you're crossing Terminal, it's fine as you get near it, but then crossing is difficult, and then it kind of falls apart at that intersection. When you're coming down Church Street to cross the street, that's fine, but then it gets pretty ambiguous when you cross the street. It's not intuitive how to get down to the water. So what we'd like to do is identify the key routes that can help people get from the water to the downtown and improve the legibility and the accessibility of those routes so more people will find the downtown and come to the downtown. So this is this is kind of a cartoon of what we felt were the zones. And Bastion Street was kind of a boundary. So this zone to the north is one zone, then there's this kind of the main part of Commercial Street, and then Terminal cuts off the sort of the Victoria Wallace area, and then there's this interior space in Diane Carl Plaza, which is kind of a dead space at the moment. So you got all these sort of disconnected parts. Front Street, though a lot better today since what the city's done to do the road diet and the bike lanes and stuff, still is a separator from the waterfront to the balance of the downtown. And it would be great if we could better connect across it and kind of advertise that there's through the design, that there's something inland. So something like this, so that when you're at the end of Church Street, that there's a clear route up to Dan Crown Plaza. When you're at Bastion Street, there's a way in. That the intersection at Bastion is more pedestrian friendly. When you're at what's the name of that, Museum Way, you've already done some really cool stuff here. You got a new hotel coming in, and make that a really nice connection. Then, of course, do something to reduce the barrier effect of Terminal to integrate the Wallace Victoria area into the downtown. So these are the sorts of initiatives that we'll be looking at when we come back during the design week to tie the whole place together and make it more legible and accessible. So this is about the same sort of idea to reduce the ambiguity of some of the connections and make these strong connections that is legible. And people will just come naturally. They'll get curious. They'll see, hey, there's something cool there. I think I'll go take a walk. And we're really looking at things like loops. People love loops. So they could come in on Church, walk down the street, past Diane Carl Plaza, and maybe go back on Museum Way, past the new hotel, and down to the waterfront. So there's multiple routes, and keep it interesting. So that's the kind of thing that we're leaning towards at the moment. And when we come back in February, we'll draw that up with the community and hopefully get a consensus on that's the direction for the area. So this is what we did this week. We'll have 3 more opportunities. Next time we come back for collaboration, we'll have a couple of open studios on February 1 and 2. Different times though, because some people are available later in the afternoon, some people are available at lunch, but give people some opportunities to come in and see what's going on, and then have a public meeting at the end. And hopefully then we'll have a pretty good direction of where the downtown wants to go. But that's still not the end of it, but it's the end of the charrette part, and then there'll be subsequent steps after that. But we hope we kind of get a really good consensus on kind of the main ideas. So that's where we got to with what we call Discovery Week, where we kind of learned what was going on. And we shared some ideas with everyone who came about how to make cool downtowns and how to make great main streets.